The rebuild is over. No, seriously, just 1 year after trading away their 2 stars, Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, the Jazz are in a position to become a playoff team once again. Going from a team that couldn't make it over the hump to become a championship contender to one of the youngest and deepest rosters in the entire league, the Jazz front office just pulled off an absolute masterclass, fleecing the Cavaliers and especially the Timberwolves for a ton of young talent and, more importantly, draft picks. And when I say fleece the teams, I mean it, because these are all the picks that the Utah Jazz have control of over the next few years. And on top of that, they also got great young talent in Collin Sexton, Kessler, and more. But what's next for this Jazz team? Yeah, they're in a good spot heading into the future, but they aren't anything near contenders right now. Well, the Jazz actually have a perfect plan for their team moving forward, and it could see them making it further in the playoffs than Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell ever did, and potentially landing one of the best players in the entire NBA. This past year, the Jazz have done what many NBA front offices struggle with in the modern NBA, not forcing moves. It was clear that this team wasn't going anywhere with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert, but they didn't force any trades with these guys. Instead, they were patient and got back as much value as they could. The timing was almost perfect for this team. With a lack of stars on the market, the Minnesota Timberwolves heavily overpaid for Rudy Gobert, and the Cavs, who felt as though they needed one more piece to take that next step as a team, sent over a pretty hefty package for Donovan Mitchell. Even this offseason, the Jazz could have felt pressured to make a big move similar to what the Cavs did trading for D-Mitch. But instead, this team stayed patient and acquired John Collins for pretty much nothing, which might be the steal of the offseason. Obviously, Collins isn't a number 1 or number 2 option on a championship team, but that's besides the point. The point is, the Jazz are making smart and strategic moves to put themselves in a better position than they were before. Given that the Jazz don't make any other moves this offseason, they're looking at a starting lineup of Collin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, Lauri Markkanen, John Collins, and Kessler. Talen Horton-Tucker might sneak his way into the starting lineup to help with perimeter defense, but either way, there is a lot to like about this rotation for the Jazz. Sexton and Clarkson are very solid scorers on the offensive end, Collins and Markkanen are a versatile frontcourt that opens up the offense in a big way, and Kessler is a shot blocking and rebounding machine that will be the defensive anchor for this team. Kessler pretty much does 85% of what Rudy Gobert does, but the best part is he doesn't take up half of their salary cap. So it's safe to say the team got an absolute steal with that pickup. The potential for all the players in the starting lineup for this team is very high, and there's a decent chance we see one of these guys besides Markkanen take an all-star level leap, since they'll be in a bigger role than previous seasons. But this brings up the big question: what's this team's ceiling for next year? I mean, they came out last season and shocked everyone, and even though they slowed down as the season went on, many people believe this team was just trying to tank and get a good draft pick, and they actually could have made the playoffs if they tried a little harder. But what do people expect them to do with these new additions and further developed players? Well, according to the Vegas sportsbooks, the Jazz are looking like they have the chance to prove everyone wrong again, because they are projected to have one of the worst records in the NBA, only ahead of the Detroit Pistons and San Antonio Spurs. This is a team that has a top 20 player in the NBA and a ton of young talented depth surrounding him, and the Jazz coach Will Hardy doesn't even think that Markkanen has peaked yet. Our team looks to Lauri, Hardy said. He's an NBA All-Star for a reason, and he's had a consistency about not only his play but his approach all season. I don't know what the ceiling is for Lauri, and I don't think any of us do, but I'm pretty sure we haven't seen it yet. It's clear that Coach Hardy is very high on his players, especially Lauri Markkanen, heading into next season. And although I think the Jazz will be much better than what the odds are saying, let's be honest, this team just isn't a championship contender just yet. Looking at teams like the Nuggets, Warriors, or even Suns, the Jazz just don't have the guy to lead them to a championship. But this leads us to the Jazz's plan moving forward, because the team really has only 2 options to turn this roster into a contender. And honestly, only one of these choices makes sense for the team and where they're at right now as a franchise. The obvious thing for the Jazz to do is build through the draft. draft. I mean, they have control of multiple franchises' picks for the next few years in the Cleveland Cavaliers and Minnesota Timberwolves. But here's the thing, these are both teams that have young stars locked into long-term contracts. The Cavs have Garland, Allen, Mobley, and Mitchell, and the Wolves have Anthony Edwards, Gobert, and Towns. Even though none of these teams are true contenders, they'll likely be playoff teams at the very least for the next few seasons. And because of this, all of the first round picks that the Jazz have collected will likely be in the late first round. So they won't have a chance to actually draft a top player in the class to propel them to that championship status they're going after. Even the Jazz themselves will likely be making the playoffs these next few years, so their picks will be low as well. So it will be very difficult for the Jazz to actually build through the draft despite their immense amount of assets. So what's the other choice for this Jazz team? Sign star free agents when they're available? There will be a ton of stars that hit the free agency market next season, like Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and even more. But unfortunately, the Jazz are a small market team, so like it or not, their chances of landing someone like this are slim to none just because of where they're located. Small market teams simply have to build through the draft, just like how the Jazz did with Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert. Or there's the other option that probably makes the most sense for this team right now. That option being trading for a star. Let me start by saying that the Jazz should not stray away from what I mentioned earlier, that being patience and making smart moves. The worst thing that this team could do is force a trade for someone like Damian Lillard, who has made it very clear that he doesn't want to play for anyone but the Miami Heat, and then lose out on a bunch of assets that they traded away for a star that ultimately just demands a trade anyways. Instead, the Jazz front office has to continue doing what they've been doing best, being patient and waiting for the perfect trade to come their way. It's honestly hard to say which NBA star in the league would be the perfect fit on this unique Jazz roster. On one hand, an elite guard that can run pick and roll with the versatile Jazz frontcourt would be something special, but on the other hand, plugging in a number one option center and having a roster very similar to the Nuggets is intriguing as well. Either way, the Jazz should not force a trade for the next star that demands out. But lucky for them, one of the stars that seems like they'll ask out sooner rather than later is actually the perfect fit for their team. You guessed it, I'm talking about Joel Embiid. Yes, there is a world where the Jazz trade for the reigning MVP and plug in the final piece to make them championship contenders. If James Harden leaves the Sixers and they don't get anything in return, or this team fails once again in the postseason next year with the duo of Embiid and Harden, there's honestly a good chance that Joel asks out, especially after he just came out and said that his goal is to win a championship, whether it's with Philly or somewhere else. Embiid provides elite production on both sides of the ball, and a trio of Sexton, Markkanen, Embiid, and whatever role players they keep in this deal would have a very similar roster construction compared to a team like the Nuggets, who as we just saw got their first championship in franchise history. Now, I'm not saying that Joel Embiid is the perfect player to trade for. I mean, he's had his own injury issues and shortcomings in the playoffs. But maybe all he needs is a new environment with a bunch of hungry players to reach the next level and get a team like the Jazz to the finals. In a deal for Embiid, the Jazz would leverage their draft picks more so than their young players. That way they can still have a competitive roster that can make a finals push once Embiid gets on the team. Let me make it very clear that this team would have to trade away smaller pieces in their draft capital, otherwise this move makes no sense. Lucky for the Jazz, they have a surprisingly deep roster with a ton of young players that might interest the 76ers if they're blowing their roster up. But unlike the Jazz, the Clippers are in a very tough spot as a franchise, and they have some major decisions to make that could ultimately lead to them trading Kawhi and Paul George. Click here to watch this video and see why the LA Clippers' problems just got worse.